The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Heritage Preservation Studios in Asheville, North Carolina, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the methodical work happening inside. Sarah Mitchell, a 38-year-old photograph restoration specialist, sat hunched over her workstation, her eyes magnified behind specialized lenses as she examined the daguerreotype that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. The studio smelled of archival paper and the faint chemical tang of preservation solutions. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains were shrouded in mist, their ancient peaks barely visible through the downpour. The photograph had come with minimal provenance. And estate sale in rural Kentucky, the seller had written in cramped handwriting. Found in the attic of the old Hartley homestead near Cumberland Gap. The family line had ended, no living descendants remained to claim it. Sarah had seen hundreds of such orphaned images throughout her 15-year career, each one a window into lives long forgotten, stories that would never be fully told. But something about this particular photograph had caught her attention from the moment she carefully removed it from its protective casing. It showed a family of 6 arranged on the porch of a rough-hewn cabin, the Appalachian wilderness visible in the soft focus behind them. The image quality was remarkably good for 1890, the date inscribed in faded ink on the back. A stern-faced man in his 40s stood at the center, one hand resting on the shoulder of a woman who must have been his wife. Her face carried that peculiar blend of exhaustion and quiet dignity that Sarah had seen in countless frontier women's portraits. 3 children ranged in age from perhaps 6 to 14, dressed in their Sunday best, though the clothes showed signs of careful mending. And at the edge of the frame, partially turned away, stood another figure, a young woman whose features were slightly blurred, as if she had moved during the long exposure required by the primitive photographic technology of the era. Sarah had been working on the restoration for 2 weeks, carefully removing years of oxidation, correcting for fading, rebuilding damaged sections pixel by pixel using advanced digital techniques combined with her knowledge of period photography. It was painstaking work that required not just technical skill but an almost archaeological patience, an ability to see past the decay to the original image beneath. Her colleague, Marcus Webb, often joked that she could probably reconstruct the Mona Lisa from a coffee stain and 3 pixels. But Marcus understood the importance of this work, the way these preserved images became the only remaining evidence that these people had existed at all, had loved and struggled and built lives in a young and often harsh country. "You're still on that Appalachian family?" Marcus's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him approach, absorbed as she was in her work. He was 42, African-American, with graying temples and the careful, steady hands of someone who had spent 20 years working with fragile historical documents. He set a steaming cup of coffee beside her workstation, the rich aroma cutting through the studio's chemical smell. "There's something wrong with it," Sarah said, not looking up from her screen. She zoomed in on a section of the image, adjusting the contrast. "Look at this. The shadows. They don't match." Marcus leaned in, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. Sarah had highlighted different elements of the photograph, overlaying directional lines that showed the angle of light and the corresponding shadows. The sun had clearly been coming from the left side of the frame, probably late afternoon based on the length of the shadows. The man's shadow fell correctly, as did the woman's and the children's. But the blurred figure at the edge, the young woman who had moved during the exposure, her shadow fell in a completely different direction, as if illuminated by a light source that didn't exist in the frame. "Camera error?" Marcus suggested, though his tone was doubtful. "Multiple exposures?" Photographers sometimes did that intentionally in that era, especially for artistic effects or when trying to include someone who couldn't be present for the original sitting. "That's what I thought initially," Sarah replied, pulling up another analysis window. "But look at the depth of field, the focus points. This wasn't a double exposure. And see here, the edge of her dress, it overlaps with the wooden post behind her. The integration is perfect. She was there when the photo was taken. But the physics of the shadows, Marcus, they're impossible. Unless there were 2 different light sources, but there's no evidence of artificial lighting, no oil lamps, no flash powder residue on the original plate. Just natural sunlight." They stared at the screen in silence for a long moment, the rain intensifying outside. Sarah felt that familiar prickle of curiosity that came when a restoration revealed something unexpected, something that didn't fit the expected narrative. Historical photographs were supposed to be straightforward, honest documents of their time. But occasionally, they held secrets, intentional or otherwise, that only modern technology could uncover. Have you tried reaching out to any historical societies in that area? Marcus asked. Someone might know about the Hartley family, might have records or journals that could explain what we're seeing. I sent inquiries to 3 different societies in eastern Kentucky and western Virginia, Sarah said, finally leaning back in her chair and accepting the coffee Marcus had brought. It was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. One responded saying they'd look into it, but you know how these things go. Underfunded, understaffed, usually run by volunteers. It could be months before I hear anything substantive. Marcus nodded, understanding. What about the photographic technique itself? Could you determine what type of camera was used, who might have taken it? Sarah pulled up another file on her computer, this one containing her technical analysis. Based on the plate size and the image characteristics, it was almost certainly a field camera, probably a Blair or Scoville model, very common among itinerant photographers in rural areas during that period. The exposure time would have been anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds, depending on available light and the photographer's skill. See the slight motion blur on the youngest child there? He fidgeted. That was common. Keeping children still for that long was nearly impossible. But the woman at the edge, Marcus said slowly, studying the image more carefully, her blur is different. It's not the blur of someone who moved during the exposure. It's more like she was deliberately positioned at the edge of the frame, almost as if the photographer was trying to include her but also hide her at the same time. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool studio air. Marcus had articulated something she had been feeling but hadn't quite put into words. There was an intentionality to the composition that went beyond the standard family portrait of the era. Someone had made very specific choices about how this photograph should look, about what it should show and what it should conceal. I'm going to keep digging, Sarah said, her determination solidifying. There's a story here, something that someone wanted preserved but also wanted hidden. And I think the answer is in the shadows. Over the next 3 days, Sarah became obsessed with the photograph. She worked late into the evenings, her husband texting her increasingly concerned messages that she answered with brief reassurances. She analyzed every square millimeter of the image, building a 3-dimensional model of the scene based on the perspective and shadows, trying to understand the spatial relationships between the figures. She consulted with colleagues who specialized in 19th-century photographic techniques, sent detailed queries to academic forums devoted to historical image analysis. None of them could explain the shadow discrepancy. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Yancey, a retired professor of Appalachian history from East Tennessee State University, responded to Sarah's inquiry to the Cumberland Gap Historical Society. Her email was lengthy and detailed, written with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime researching the region's past. Dear Ms. Mitchell, the email began, your inquiry about the Hartley family photograph is extraordinarily timely. I have been researching the social dynamics of Appalachian communities in the late 19th century for my upcoming book, and the Hartley family represents a particularly complex and tragic case study. I believe I can provide context that may help explain the anomaly you've observed in the photograph. Sarah read the email 3 times, her heart rate increasing with each pass. Dr. Yancey explained that the Hartley family had been well documented in local records, primarily because of a scandal that had rocked the small community near Cumberland Gap in 1890. The family had consisted of William Hartley, a farmer and occasional timber worker, his wife Martha, their 3 children, and William's younger sister, Caroline, who had lived with them since their mother's death in 1887. According to Dr. Yancey's research, Caroline Hartley had been something of an outsider in the community, educated beyond what was common for mountain women of that era, literate and outspoken in ways that made the conservative Presbyterian community uncomfortable. She had taught school for a time, but had been dismissed after disagreements with the local church elders about her teaching methods. She had strong opinions about women's rights and suffrage, ideas that were considered radical and dangerous in that time and place. But what made Dr. Yancey's email truly significant was what she revealed about the photograph itself. In the summer of 1890, an itinerant photographer named Silas Blackburn had traveled through the Cumberland Gap region, offering his services to families who could afford them. Photographs were still rare and expensive, markers of social status and permanence. William Hartley had commissioned the family portrait, but there had been significant tension about whether Caroline should be included. Local church records, Dr. Yancey wrote, contain references to Caroline Hartley being afflicted with moral weakness and a source of family shame. Reading between the lines of Victorian euphemism, it appears Caroline was pregnant and unmarried, a situation that carried enormous stigma in that community. Some families would have disowned a daughter or sister in such circumstances, but William, despite pressure from church elders, refused to turn Caroline out. The photograph, I believe, was his way of asserting that she remained part of his family, regardless of community judgment. Sarah sat back, the pieces beginning to fall into place. The blurred position of Caroline at the edge of the frame, the strange shadows, it all started to make a terrible kind of sense. She typed a quick response to Dr. Yancey, asking if there were any additional records about what happened to the family, about Caroline's fate and the fate of her child. The response came within hours. Dr. Yancey, it seemed, was as invested in this mystery as Sarah had become. Sarah printed out Dr. Yancey's second email and spread the pages across her workstation, alongside high-resolution printouts of the photograph. Marcus had left for the day, but she had texted him to come back, telling him she had found something significant. While she waited, she continued her analysis, now looking at the image through the lens of the information Dr. Yancey had provided. The photograph took on new dimensions of meaning. William Hartley's hand on his wife's shoulder wasn't just a typical patriarchal pose, it was protective, perhaps even defiant. Martha's exhausted dignity now seemed tinged with sadness, the weight of supporting her sister-in-law against community judgment visible in the tight line of her mouth. The children stared at the camera with the solemnity common to the era, but Sarah could now see something else in their expressions, a wariness, an awareness that their family was different, marked by scandal. And Caroline, positioned at the edge, partially turned away, her features blurred by motion or perhaps by deliberate manipulation during the photographic development process, she was both present and absent, included and excluded, a ghost in her own family portrait. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, shaking rain from his jacket. The weather had been consistently terrible all week, fitting for the dark story that was emerging from the old photograph. Sarah handed him the printed emails without preamble, and he read them in silence, his expression growing more serious as he absorbed the information. "So the shadow anomaly," he said slowly, "you think it was intentional? That the photographer deliberately created it?" "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling up a new analysis on her computer. She had spent the last hour researching Silas Blackburn, the itinerant photographer mentioned in Dr. Yancey's email. "I found references to him in several historical photography journals. He wasn't just any traveling photographer. He had trained in New York, studied with some of the pioneers of American photography. He was technically skilled enough to have work exhibited in galleries. But he chose to travel through rural areas, documenting frontier life." She opened a digital archive containing several other photographs attributed to Blackburn. They showed farmers, coal miners, mountain families, all captured with a stark, almost brutally honest quality that was unusual for the era. Where most photographers of the time tried to idealize their subjects, to present them in the most flattering light possible, Blackburn seemed interested in truth, in showing the hardship and dignity of frontier existence without romantic embellishment. He was known for experimental techniques, Sarah continued, pulling up an article from an 1892 photography journal. Double exposures, intentional blur to create emotional effects, manipulation of light during development. Some contemporary critics called his work too modern, said he was corrupting the documentary nature of photography with artistic interpretation. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, studying Blackburn's other work. "So you're suggesting he created the shadow anomaly deliberately? As some kind of statement about Caroline's situation?" "Not just the shadows," Sarah said, her excitement growing as the theory solidified in her mind. Look at the composition again, knowing what we know now. Caroline is included in the frame, but she's separate, isolated. The shadow that doesn't match the others, it's like a visual metaphor for her social ostracism. She's in the photograph, but she doesn't quite belong to the same reality as the rest of the family. Blackburn was making an artistic choice, using the technical capabilities of his medium to comment on what he was witnessing. That's incredibly sophisticated for 1890, Marcus said, but his tone was thoughtful rather than skeptical. Do we have any evidence that Blackburn was politically or socially engaged with issues like women's rights or social justice? Sarah had anticipated the question and pulled up another document. His personal journals were donated to the Library of Congress by his grandson in 1965. They've been digitized. And yes, he wrote extensively about the injustices he witnessed during his travels. Poverty, child labor, the treatment of women in isolated communities. He saw himself as more than just a photographer. He was a documentarian of social conditions, someone who wanted his work to spark change. They spent the next hour going through Blackburn's journals, finding numerous entries from his time in the Cumberland Gap region in the summer of 1890. His writing was eloquent and angry, describing the harsh judgment faced by women who transgressed social norms, the way communities turned on their own members when they failed to conform to rigid moral codes. Then Sarah found the entry about the Hartley family photograph, dated August 15, 1890. She read it aloud to Marcus, her voice catching slightly as she absorbed the photographer's words. "Today I made a portrait that troubled me greatly," Blackburn had written in his neat, slanted script. The Hartley family, decent people struggling with a situation not of their making. The younger sister, Caroline, carries a child but no husband. The community has branded her with scarlet judgment, though none know the circumstances of her condition. William Hartley insisted she be included in the family portrait, and I admired his steadfastness. But I could see the weight of shame in Caroline's posture, the way she positioned herself at the edge, as if trying to make herself small, to minimize her presence. The entry continued. I made a technical choice that some might call manipulation. Using a secondary exposure and careful positioning during development, I created a visual effect that represents what I witnessed. Caroline Hartley exists in the family portrait, but her shadow falls differently, as if she stands in a different world from her loved ones. This is the truth of her situation. She is included but separate, present but isolated. The photograph, I hope, captures not just faces but a social reality that should shame us all. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. Across the workbench, Marcus had gone very still. The photograph on the screen before them had transformed completely. What had started as a technical mystery was now revealed as an intentional act of social commentary, a 19th century photographer using his craft to protest injustice. "This changes everything," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't just a family portrait. It's an artifact of social history, a protest piece, art and activism combined in a way that was incredibly rare for that time." "We need to contact Dr. Yancey again," Sarah said, wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. "She needs to know what we found. And we need to find out what happened to Caroline, to her child. The story can't end with just the photograph." Dr. Yancey's response to their new findings was enthusiastic and detailed. She had continued her own research, digging through church records, county documents, and personal letters held in various archives. The story she pieced together was both heartbreaking and, in some ways, hopeful, a testament to the resilience of people facing impossible circumstances. Caroline Hartley had given birth to a daughter in November 1890, 3 months after the photograph was taken. The child was named Rose, though the birth record listed no father. The scandal had been significant enough that it was mentioned in multiple contemporary sources. Several church elders had petitioned to have the Hartley family excluded from church services unless they disowned Caroline. William had refused, and as a result, the entire family had been socially ostracized. But Dr. Yancey had found something else, something that provided a fuller picture of the situation. In a collection of personal letters donated to a regional archive by a descendant of the Presbyterian minister who had served the community, There was a confession letter dated December 1890. The letter was from a married man, a prominent member of the church community, admitting that he was Rose's father. He had taken advantage of Caroline during a time when she had been working as a domestic helper in his household. He had threatened her with worse consequences if she revealed his identity. His confession came only after his wife discovered the truth and threatened to leave him if he didn't take responsibility. The letter never became public during the man's lifetime. The minister had kept it confidential, using it only to pressure the church elders to stop their persecution of the Hartley family. The social rehabilitation was slow and incomplete, but the worst of the ostracism ended. Caroline remained in her brother's household, raising Rose with the help of Martha and the extended family. What happened to them after that? Sarah asked in her video call with Dr. Yancey the next morning. The professor's face on the screen was kind, framed by gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, her office visible behind her, packed with books and historical documents. That's where the story gets interesting, Dr. Yancey replied, a slight smile on her face. Caroline learned typewriting, one of the new office skills that were opening up opportunities for women in the 1890s. By 1895, she had moved to Knoxville with Rose, found work in a law office. She became involved with the women's suffrage movement, spoke at rallies, wrote articles for progressive newspapers. She never married, devoted herself to her daughter and to activism. Rose grew up to become a teacher, married well, had 3 children of her own. The family line continued through her. Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride, as if Caroline were someone she had known personally. So she survived it, built a life despite everything. More than survived, Dr. Yancey said. I found an interview with her in a 1915 suffrage newspaper. She was asked about what had motivated her activism, and she talked about her experience in Cumberland Gap, about being judged for circumstances beyond her control, about her brother's courage in standing by her. She said that photograph, the one Silas Blackburn made, had become important to her. She carried a copy of it with her always, said it reminded her that even when society tried to push her to the margins, she still existed, still mattered, still cast a shadow, even if it fell in a different direction from everyone else's. Sarah was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears. Marcus, standing beside her desk, had his hand on her shoulder, providing silent support. The photograph on her screen, which she had stared at for weeks, trying to solve its technical mystery, now felt almost sacred, a deliberate act of witness and solidarity across more than a century of time. Thank you, Sarah managed to say to Dr. Yancey. Thank you for helping us understand the full story. Thank you for caring enough to investigate, the professor replied. These stories matter. They remind us that the people in old photographs weren't just subjects, they were human beings with complex lives, facing challenges that often echo forward to our own time. Caroline Hartley's story, the way she was treated and the way she overcame it, it's still relevant. We're still fighting many of the same battles about judgment, stigma, and women's autonomy. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly at her workstation for a long time, thinking about Caroline and Rose, about William and Martha who had risked so much to keep their family together, about Silas Blackburn who had used his art to make a statement that would be understood more than a century later. The photograph had become something more than a restoration project. It was a bridge across time, connecting past struggles to present realities. The restoration of the Hartley family photograph took on new urgency and meaning. Sarah worked with renewed focus, not just preserving the image but preparing it for a larger purpose. She contacted several museums and historical societies, proposing an exhibition that would feature the photograph alongside the research that explained its significance. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The Appalachian Heritage Museum in Asheville agreed to host a special exhibition, partnering with the Kentucky Historical Society to create a traveling show that would bring Caroline's story to multiple communities. Marcus helped design the exhibition materials, creating detailed explanatory panels that told the story of the photograph, of Caroline and her family, of Silas Blackburn and his artistic choices, of the social context that made the image both necessary and radical. They included excerpts from Blackburn's journals, from Caroline's later writings, from historical documents that illustrated the harsh realities faced by unmarried mothers in late 19th century America. Dr. Yancey agreed to serve as a historical consultant and to give lectures at each exhibition venue. She was thrilled to see her research reaching a broader audience, and she continued to uncover new details about the Hartley family as she dug deeper into archives. She found photographs of Rose as a young woman, letters between Caroline and suffrage leaders, documentation of Caroline's work with organizations fighting for women's rights and labor protections. But it was another discovery that brought the story full circle in a way that left Sarah breathless. Dr. Yancey called her 3 weeks before the exhibition was scheduled to open, her voice trembling with excitement. "I found her," Dr. Yancey said. "I found a descendant. Rose's great-great-granddaughter. Her name is Jennifer Hartley Morrison. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky. I contacted her through a genealogy website, explained what we were doing. Sarah, she wants to meet you. She wants to see the photograph." The meeting was arranged for the following week at the Appalachian Heritage Museum. Sarah had set up the photograph in the exhibition space early, wanting Jennifer to see it in the context they had created. The museum gallery was beautiful, with soft lighting and carefully curated displays that told the story chronologically. The Hartley photograph was the centerpiece, enlarged to 4 feet across, its details visible in stunning clarity. Jennifer Hartley Morrison arrived exactly on time, accompanied by her teenage daughter, Emma. Jennifer was in her early 40s, a lawyer by profession, with dark hair and the strong features that Sarah recognized from the photograph. She could see echoes of Caroline in Jennifer's face, in the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. "My God," Jennifer whispered when she saw the photograph. She approached it slowly, her daughter beside her, both of them staring at the image that connected them to their past. "I never knew this existed. I never knew any of this story." Sarah gave them time, standing back with Dr. Yancey and Marcus, letting the moment unfold naturally. Emma reached out as if to touch the photograph, then pulled her hand back, mindful of the "do not touch" boundary. Jennifer was crying, but they were tears of discovery rather than sadness. "That's her?" Jennifer asked, pointing to Caroline's blurred figure at the edge. "That's my great-great-great-grandmother?" "That's her," Dr. Yancey confirmed, stepping forward. "Caroline Hartley. And this," she indicated the children in the photograph, "this is your ancestor, Rose. She was born 3 months after this photograph was taken." Sarah watched Jennifer's face as she absorbed this information, saw the emotions flowing across it, pride and sadness and wonder all mixed together. Emma was reading the exhibition panels intently, absorbing the story of her ancestors' struggle and triumph. "I knew my family came from this area," Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we'd lost most of the details over the generations. There were vague stories about an ancestor who had been involved in the suffrage movement, but I didn't know who she was or what had driven her to that work. And this photograph, this moment of her being judged and excluded but also loved and defended, it explains so much." Sarah explained about the shadow anomaly, about Blackburn's intentional artistic choice, about how the photograph was designed to make a statement about Caroline's social ostracism. Jennifer listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her lawyer's mind engaging with the evidence and interpretation. "So he was protesting her treatment," Jennifer said thoughtfully, studying the shadows that had first caught Sarah's attention months ago. "He was using his art to say that the way she was being treated was wrong, that the shadow of judgment fell unfairly on her." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. And Caroline herself recognized that. "We found references in her later writings where she talked about how that photograph helped her understand that her experience, painful as it was, had meaning, that someday it might speak to others facing similar judgment." Emma, who had been quiet, spoke up for the first time. "This is for a school project, but it's also personal," she said, pulling out her phone. "Can I take pictures? I want to write about this, about her. About how people treated women who made mistakes or who were victims of circumstances beyond their control. About how that still happens today." Jennifer put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, pride evident in her face. "That's my girl," she said softly. "Caroline would have loved you." They spent 2 hours in the gallery, Sarah and Dr. Yancey sharing everything they had learned, answering questions, showing Jennifer and Emma the additional research materials that would be part of the exhibition. Jennifer shared what little she knew about the family history, filling in gaps in the timeline, confirming details that had been uncertain. Before they left, Jennifer made a request. "I'd like to speak at the exhibition opening," she said. "If that's possible. I think it's important for people to know that this isn't just history, that Caroline's descendant is here, living a life that she made possible by refusing to be destroyed by judgment and stigma. My daughter exists because Caroline survived and fought back. That matters." The exhibition opening 2 weeks later was far more heavily attended than anyone had anticipated. Word had spread through social media, through local news coverage, through the networks of historians and feminist scholars who recognized the significance of what had been discovered. The gallery was packed, people spilling out into the museum's main hall, all of them there to see the photograph and hear the story. Sarah felt nervous as she stood at the front of the gallery, preparing to give her presentation about the technical aspects of the restoration and the discovery of the shadow anomaly. But when she looked out at the crowd and saw Jennifer and Emma standing in the front row, saw Dr. Yancey smiling encouragingly, saw Marcus giving her a thumbs up from the side, she felt centered, ready to share what they had learned. She told the story of the restoration, of her initial confusion about the shadows, of the gradual uncovering of the truth behind the photograph. She explained Silas Blackburn's technique, his artistic choice to use photographic manipulation as a form of social commentary. She showed enlarged details of the image, pointing out the subtle ways Blackburn had constructed meaning through composition and light. Then Dr. Yancey took over, providing the historical context, telling Caroline's story with the academic rigor and emotional engagement that made her such a gifted teacher. She talked about the social conditions of the late 19th century, about the harsh judgment faced by unmarried mothers, about the courage it took for William Hartley to stand by his sister, for Martha to support her, for Caroline herself to survive and eventually thrive. But it was Jennifer's speech that brought many in the audience to tears. She stood before the crowd, her daughter beside her, and spoke about what it meant to discover this history, to understand where she came from in a way she never had before. "I am an attorney," Jennifer said, her voice steady and clear. "I have spent my career fighting for justice, for women's rights, for people who face discrimination and stigma. I thought I came to this work because of my own values, my own sense of what was right. But now I understand that I was also carrying forward a legacy I didn't even know I had. Caroline Hartley, my great-great-great-grandmother, faced a situation that could have destroyed her. She was judged, ostracized, pushed to the margins of her community for circumstances that were not her fault. But she didn't let that define her. She took that experience and transformed it into activism, into a life devoted to making sure other women wouldn't face the same condemnation." Jennifer paused, looking at the photograph, at Caroline's blurred figure standing at the edge of her family. "When I look at this image, I see more than just an old photograph. I see a moment of choice. William chose to keep his sister in the family portrait despite community pressure. Martha chose to support her. Silas Blackburn chose to make an artistic statement about the injustice he witnessed. And Caroline chose to survive, to build a life, to fight back against a world that wanted to erase her. All of those choices matter. They created ripples forward through time that eventually reached me and my daughter. We exist because they made those choices. We get to live free, independent lives because they fought for it." The applause was thunderous. Sarah saw people in the audience wiping away tears, saw the nods of recognition from those who understood that Caroline's story was not just historical, but contemporary, relevant to ongoing struggles over judgment, stigma, and women's autonomy. After the formal presentations ended, the crowd moved through the exhibition, examining the photographs and documents, reading the carefully curated explanatory materials. Sarah overheard conversations about reproductive justice, about social stigma, about the ways that communities still ostracize those who fail to conform to conventional morality. The photograph had become exactly what Silas Blackburn had intended it to be, a catalyst for discussion about justice and human dignity. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the museum had closed, Sarah stood alone in the gallery, looking at the photograph one more time. In the dim evening light, Caroline's figure seemed almost to glow, her mismatched shadow a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. Sarah thought about all the work that had gone into understanding this single image, all the research and analysis and careful restoration. It had been worth every minute. Marcus found her there, standing in contemplation. "You did good work," he said simply. "You saw something that others might have missed, and you didn't stop until you understood it. That's what makes you exceptional at this." Sarah smiled, accepting the compliment. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was all of us working together. Dr. Yancey's research, your technical support, Jennifer's willingness to share her family's story. That's how important work gets done, not by individuals but by communities of people who care about truth and justice." They stood together in silence for a moment, two colleagues who had become friends through shared purpose, looking at a photograph that had revealed itself to be so much more than it first appeared. The traveling exhibition was more successful than anyone had anticipated. After its initial run in Asheville, it moved to the Kentucky Historical Society in Frankfort, then to the Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls, New York, then to a dozen other venues across the country. At each location, the story of Caroline Hartley and the photograph with the impossible shadows resonated deeply with audiences who saw parallels to contemporary social issues. Sarah received countless emails and messages from people who had seen the exhibition, sharing their own family stories of judgment and survival, of ancestors who had faced stigma and somehow persevered. The photograph had become a symbol, a focal point for discussions about how societies treat those who transgress conventional moral boundaries, and about the importance of family solidarity in the face of communal condemnation. Dr. Yancey completed her book, Shadows and Light: Women's Lives in the Appalachian South, 1870 to 1920, with Caroline's story as one of the central case studies. The book was widely praised for its combination of rigorous scholarship and accessible writing, and it brought renewed attention to the experiences of women in rural American communities during the late 19th century. Several universities adopted it for their history and women's studies courses. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the way the story inspired creative work. A documentary filmmaker contacted Sarah about making a film that would trace the photograph's journey from discovery through restoration to exhibition, using it as a lens to examine ongoing issues of reproductive justice and social stigma. A playwright in Tennessee wrote a one-woman show based on Caroline's life, performing it to sold-out audiences in regional theaters. A novelist began work on a fictionalized version of the story, planning to expand on the lives of all the people in the photograph, imagining the conversations and conflicts that the historical record couldn't fully capture. Jennifer and Emma became actively involved in promoting the exhibition and the broader issues it raised. Emma wrote her school paper on her ancestors' experience, winning regional recognition for the quality of her research and the passion of her advocacy. Jennifer began speaking at events focused on reproductive justice, sharing Caroline's story as a reminder that contemporary battles over women's autonomy and social judgment had deep historical roots. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Sarah received a package at the studio. It came from Lexington, Kentucky, and inside was a carefully wrapped photograph. The note from Jennifer explained that it had been discovered in a box of family papers that her mother had kept in storage. It was another image of Caroline, this one taken much later, probably in the early 1900s based on the photographic style and Caroline's apparent age. In this photograph, Caroline stood alone, her features clear and sharp, no blur or artistic manipulation obscuring her face. She was middle-aged, her hair pulled back severely, wearing a simple dark dress. But what caught Sarah's attention was Caroline's expression and her stance. She looked directly at the camera with absolute confidence, her shoulders back, her chin lifted slightly. There was no shame in her posture, no apology in her gaze. This was a woman who had survived judgment and emerged stronger, who had taken her painful experience and transformed it into purpose. In her hands, Caroline held a photograph, the very same family portrait that had started this entire journey. Sarah could just make out the figures in the image Caroline was holding, could see herself positioned at the edge, the ghost in her own family's portrait. The meta image, a photograph of someone holding a photograph, created a strange sense of continuity, of Caroline literally carrying her past forward into her present. Jennifer's note continued, "My great-grandmother Rose told my grandmother that Caroline kept this photograph with her always, that she considered it proof that she had existed and mattered even when her community wanted to pretend she didn't. When Rose inherited it, she passed it down with the instruction that every generation should know the story, should understand what Caroline had survived and overcome. But somewhere along the way, the story got lost, the details forgotten. Thank you for recovering it, for making sure Caroline's voice was heard again." Sarah immediately began the process of restoring this second photograph, treating it with the same care and attention she had given the first. As she worked, she thought about the concept of witness, about how photographs serve as evidence that lives were lived, that struggles were endured, that people mattered regardless of whether their communities acknowledged their worth. The second photograph was added to the exhibition, creating a powerful bookend to Caroline's story. Visitors could see her at two moments in time, first as the ostracized young woman standing at the edge of her family portrait, her shadow falling in an impossible direction, and then as the mature activist, confident and unbowed, literally holding her own history in her hands. The transformation was profound and inspiring. Marcus joked that they should start a specialized division of the restoration studio focused on photographs with historical significance and social justice implications. But behind the joke was a serious proposal. The work they had done on the Hartley photograph had demonstrated that restoration was about more than just preserving images. It was about recovering stories, about making visible the lives and struggles of people who had been marginalized or forgotten. Sarah began accepting projects with that criterion in mind, seeking out photographs that might contain hidden stories, images that documented social conditions or captured moments of resistance and solidarity. She partnered with archives and historical societies focused on underrepresented communities, offering her services to help recover visual evidence of their histories. The work was fulfilling in ways that standard restoration had never been, because it felt connected to something larger, to the ongoing project of building a more complete and honest understanding of the past. A year after the exhibition first opened, Sarah returned to the Appalachian Heritage Museum for a symposium on photography and social documentation. Scholars, photographers, historians, and activists had gathered to discuss the role of images in shaping historical understanding and supporting contemporary social movements. The Hartley photograph was featured prominently, used as an example of how technical analysis could reveal hidden meanings and how historical images could speak to present concerns. During a break between sessions, Sarah walked through the gallery where the Hartley exhibition was still installed. It had become such a popular draw that the museum had decided to make it a permanent display. She stood before the enlarged photograph, looking at Caroline's blurred figure, at the shadow that fell in an impossible direction, at the artistic choice Silas Blackburn had made more than a century ago to document not just faces but an injustice. She thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by this image, from William and Martha who had stood by Caroline despite community pressure, to Rose who had grown up with the story, to Jennifer and Emma who had discovered their own history through the restoration work, to the thousands of exhibition visitors who had seen their own struggles reflected in Caroline's experience. "It's still powerful, isn't it?" Dr. Yancey's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to see the professor approaching, smiling warmly. They had become friends over the course of the project, united by their shared passion for recovering hidden histories. "I think about her all the time," Sarah admitted. "Caroline. I wonder what she would think about all this, about her photograph traveling around the country, about her story being taught in universities, about her descendant carrying forward her activism." Dr. Yancey stood beside her, both of them gazing at the photograph. "I think she would be proud," the professor said, "and maybe a little amused. She was fighting for a future where women wouldn't face the kind of judgment she experienced, where being unmarried and pregnant wouldn't destroy your life. We haven't fully achieved that future yet, but we're closer than we were. And part of what moves us forward is remembering the people who fought before us, understanding that our contemporary struggles have deep roots." They were joined by Jennifer, who had come to the symposium to participate in a panel about using family history in advocacy work. She stood on Sarah's other side, the the three women looking at the image that connected them across discipline, profession, and time. "My daughter wants to be a historian," Jennifer said quietly. "She's 15 now, thinking about colleges, about what she wants to do with her life. And she says she wants to uncover stories like Caroline's, to find the people who have been erased or forgotten and bring them back into the light." I told her that's exactly the kind of work the world needs. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. The photograph she had struggled to restore, the technical mystery she had worked so hard to solve, had become something far more significant than she could have imagined. It had bridged past and present, connected a family across generations, sparked important conversations about justice and dignity, and inspired a new generation to continue the work of recovery and remembrance. That evening, at the symposium's closing reception, Sarah was approached by a young photographer who had attended several of the day's sessions. She was in her 20s, carrying a battered camera bag and a portfolio of her own work. She introduced herself as Maya, explained that she was documenting contemporary Appalachian life, trying to capture the region's complexity and dignity in ways that avoided stereotypes and exploitation. "I wanted to thank you," Maya said, her voice earnest. "Your presentation about the Hartley photograph, about how Silas Blackburn used his technical skills to make a statement about injustice, it clarified something I've been struggling with. I want my work to matter beyond just being beautiful images. I want it to mean something, to contribute to understanding and change." Seeing what Blackburn did in 1890, how he used the tools available to him to protest what he witnessed, it helped me understand how I can do the same thing with my work today. Sarah felt a surge of emotion, recognizing in Maya's words the same passion that had driven her own work, that had motivated Blackburn more than a century ago. "Can I give you some advice?" she asked, and Maya nodded eagerly. "Never forget that the people you photograph are human beings with complex lives and stories. Your job isn't just to capture their image but to bear witness to their existence, to document their dignity and struggle with honesty and respect. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply to pay attention, to look closely at what you're seeing and to trust that close attention will reveal something meaningful." Maya thanked her profusely, and they exchanged contact information, Sarah promising to look at Maya's work and provide feedback. After Maya left, Marcus appeared at Sarah's elbow, handing her a glass of wine. "Another life changed by the photograph," he observed. "You're building quite a legacy here." Sarah laughed, but accepted the characterization. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about what's possible when we really look at the past, when we treat historical images not as dead artifacts but as living documents that can speak across time. Caroline's photograph was always there, waiting to be understood. We just had to pay attention." They stood together at the reception, surrounded by historians and activists, photographers and scholars, all of them engaged in the work of understanding the past and connecting it to present struggles. Sarah thought about the long chain of attention and care that had brought Caroline's story back into the light, from Silas Blackburn, who had crafted the image with such intentional meaning, to William and Martha, who had preserved it, to Rose and her descendants who had carried it forward, to the estate sale where it had been found, to Sarah's own obsessive investigation of the shadow anomaly. Every link in that chain mattered. Every person who had chosen to look closely, to care about accuracy and truth, to preserve evidence even when they didn't fully understand its significance, had contributed to this moment. It was a reminder that historical work was never done, that there were always more stories to uncover, more people whose lives deserved to be remembered and honored. 2 years after the initial restoration, Sarah was invited to present at a major conference on digital preservation and historical photography. She used the Hartley photograph as her central case study, walking the audience through the entire journey from initial mystery to full historical understanding. She showed the technical analysis that had revealed the shadow anomaly, explained the research process that had uncovered the story behind the image, discussed the exhibition's impact and the ongoing work of connecting past to present. At the end of her presentation, she displayed both photographs of Caroline, the family portrait and the later solo image, side by side on the screen. The contrast was striking, visual proof of survival and transformation, of a life that refused to be defined by judgment and stigma. When we restore historical photographs, Sarah said in conclusion, We're not just preserving images. We're recovering voices, bearing witness to lives that might otherwise be forgotten, creating opportunities for past and present to speak to each other. This photograph of Caroline Hartley and her family started as a technical puzzle, a strange anomaly that didn't make sense. But by paying attention, by refusing to dismiss the anomaly as a simple error, by digging deeper into context and history, we discovered something profound. We found an act of artistic resistance from 1890, a photographer using his skills to protest injustice. We found a family's courage in standing by one of their own despite community pressure. We found a woman who survived trauma and judgment to become an activist and advocate. And we found a through line from past to present, a reminder that the struggles we face today have deep historical roots and that understanding those roots can strengthen our present efforts. The applause was sustained and enthusiastic. During the question period that followed, Sarah was asked about her plans for future projects, whether she would continue to seek out photographs with hidden social significance. She confirmed that she would, explaining that the Hartley project had transformed her understanding of what restoration work could and should be. I used to think my job was to make old photographs look better, to remove damage and restore them to something close to their original appearance, she said. But now I understand that my real job is to help photographs tell their stories, to use technical analysis and historical research to reveal meanings that might otherwise remain hidden. Every photograph contains multitudes, if we're willing to look closely enough. After the conference, Sarah returned to her studio in Asheville, back to the daily work of restoration and preservation. But she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose, an understanding that her technical skills were in service of something larger. She thought often of Caroline Hartley, of the young woman who had stood at the edge of her family portrait more than a century ago, her shadow falling in an impossible direction, marked by an artist who wanted the world to see the injustice being done to her. That photograph, which had seemed like just another routine restoration project when it arrived at the studio, had changed everything. It had taught Sarah that history was never really past, that images could speak across time, that paying close attention to anomalies and mysteries could reveal profound truths. It had connected her to a community of scholars and activists, of descendants and fellow travelers, all of them engaged in the work of recovery and remembrance. On the wall of Sarah's workstation, alongside her technical equipment and color calibration charts, she had hung a print of the Hartley family photograph. It served as a daily reminder of why her work mattered, of the stories waiting to be discovered in the archives and attics and estate sales of America. Every time she began a new restoration project, she looked at that image, at Caroline's blurred figure and impossible shadow, and she remembered to look closely, to question assumptions, to dig deeper when something didn't quite make sense. Because sometimes, those anomalies and mysteries were the most important clues of all. Sometimes, the things that seemed wrong or impossible were actually intentional, meaningful, pregnant with significance that could only be understood by those willing to invest the time and care to uncover the full story. And sometimes, an old photograph was not just a window into the past but a bridge to the present, a voice speaking across time to tell us that the struggles we face today are not new, that others have fought these battles before us, and that remembering their courage can strengthen our own. The restoration was complete, but the work of witnessing and remembering would continue. Caroline's shadow, falling in its impossible direction, would keep speaking to anyone willing to look closely and listen carefully. And in that ongoing conversation between past and present, in that refusal to let important stories be forgotten, there was hope for justice, for understanding, for a future where people would no longer be pushed to the margins because they failed to conform to conventional expectations. Sarah returned to her work, ready to discover the next mystery, to restore the next image, to help the next voice from the past speak to the present. The Hartley photograph had taught her that every image mattered, that every life deserved to be remembered, and that sometimes the most important work a person could do was simply to pay attention, to care enough to look closely, and to refuse to let stories die in darkness when they could be brought into the light.